Welcome to the fourth edition of the Oddity Wine Club with Todd and myself. And so it is February. You just survived Valentine's Day, so here's some wine for you for the weekend. So as always, I will get out of the way, and Todd will get this bad boy started, and I'll interrupt him lots, and just to see the expression on his face. And here we go.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Round four. Excited to taste these wines with you. We'll get right into it. Wine number one is from Illahe, which is from the Willamette Valley in Oregon. The last time we did a wine from Willamette, it was a Pinot Noir, and Illahe certainly does a lot of those, but this is their Pinot Gris, which is a fairly planted white grape in Oregon and the Willamette Valley in particular. This winery is incredibly interesting. They've been around since 1983. They've got a large home vineyard, which is about 80 acres. And they still do everything painstakingly by hand. They've got an ancient old wooden basket press, their own vineyard. They still plow by horse and bring all the grapes in by horse. They have a Pinot Noir that they make with their neighbor's fruit that they bring up the river by canoe, and they use no electricity to make this wine. So they are out there, to say the least, but their wines are fantastic. They're very pure, they're very elegant. And so we've got the 2020 Pinot Gris from the Willamette Valley, which comes mostly from their home vineyard, which is all done by horse, like I mentioned, and they've got a little bit of fruit from two of their neighbors. But yeah, I think this wine's brilliant. On the nose, it really jumps out of the glass. It's super aromatic and expressive. Lots of fresh and ripe pear and apple. I get a really lovely note of mint this morning. That we opened these wines last night so that Brad could take some wine to taste with me, and that mint note wasn't quite as prominent as it is now. A little bit of minerality. Really lovely texture, nice and round. A little bit of phenolic bitterness, and what phenolic bitterness is just tannin in white wine. You don't usually see tannin in white wine, and this wine's just got a little bit of it, but it's a little bit drying on the inside of the mouth. Really good freshness for a Pinot Gris. Sometimes Pinot Gris can hit your palate, and you think it's going to be super refreshing. Then it hits your palate, and it's just kind of like, it's not a really high acid variety. But this wine has some good freshness to it. This wine is dry. It's not bone dry. And the difference is that most white wines will have just like 1 or 2 grams of residual sugar in it when the fermentation stops. This wine actually has 4 grams of residual sugar. So just on the tip of your tongue, you might get just a little sweetness. So that's why I'm calling it dry instead of bone dry. I think the finish pushes through on this. It's finishes with a little bit of white flower, a little jasmine, but really quite good. Little history on the Willamette Valley. They were the first to plant Pinot Gris outside of Europe in 1969. It was David Lett at Ivory Vineyards, and they still have those original plantings that were planted in 1969. And I think Oregon makes excellent Pinot Gris as well as Pinot Noir, which is why we put this in the box this month. So what do you think, Brad?
I have so many questions. I just hope I remember all of them. And as you know, well documented, I'm an idiot. Like, how do you get this much mint in a wine? You know, like I do, the mint jumps right out of me. It's on the sides of my tongue. Like, how does that come to be? Did you have a Wrigley's farm there? Was there chewing gum? Like,
well, that's the thing, is that there's within all probability that there was probably a lot of wild mint growing in one of the vineyards, and the essential oils get onto the grapes. So when they press the grapes, there's a lovely minty note. It's all part of the terroir. You see it all over the world. A couple of good examples: Coonawarra in Australia. There's eucalyptus trees everywhere. Right. Same within in Portugal. We tasted a wine from Domaine Bouchau in the first wine box. You know, I was lucky enough to visit them last year in the fall, And as soon as you get out of the car at their property, there's eucalyptus everywhere. You close your eyes and you can breathe it in. It smells like eucalyptus. The Okanagan has the black sage everywhere. So the wines from the South Okanagan tend to have that kind of sage character to them. Even California, I've been to visit wineries, Hansel, and one of the telltale signs of their wines is that they smell like laurel, bay leaf, because the whole property is surrounded by these massive ancient laurel trees. So my guess would be that there is a lot of wild mint growing near one of the vineyards where this wine was made.
And it would be growing, like, I mean, I understand the terroir, like, you know, in Naramata, like everything reminds me of a peach, you know, like there's because peaches were there and it is like part of the soil. But this mint, is it because it was there previously, or is it growing at the same time?
Yeah, it'd be growing at the same time. It'd be like growing wild. You know, I don't know all the ins and outs of this winery, but I would imagine that they have cover crops, which means they've got grass growing in between the rows of vines so that the vines have to compete for water, which makes them dig deeper. I know that the winery does not irrigate their mature vines. I think what they do is they water their young vines to get them established, and then they take them off drip irrigation, right, and makes them stronger. So they give them some water, give them a helping hand for the first few years, and then take them off the water. So they really have to dig deep to get water, and that makes the grapes have to struggle to ripen, and just makes better fruit.
Now, and just getting back to the start, when you were talking about, you know, everything's done by hand, you know, plowed by horse. Now, I know for other things where there's automation, you get bruising of fruit and all that stuff where there's automation. Is this part of the allure of doing things by hand? So you handle the product differently and you get different results because it's more carefully handled, or is that not really, because they still get tossed into barrels or bushels and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, this I didn't touch on it because it's not a huge component of the wine, but there is a slight nuttiness or an oxidative character to this wine. And I think that comes back to the winemaking. Like you said, I mentioned that they have an old wooden basket press. So most of the times that I've done harvest, actually every time I've done harvest, I've never seen a wooden press used, you know, personally. But what usually happens now is that wineries have, you know, more modern technology. So they have a pneumatic press, which essentially is a long cylinder or tube, and they put the grapes inside, and then in the center of that tube there's an airbag that gets filled up with air, and it slowly expands and gently crushes the grapes, and it gently pushes the juice out. Right, it's very soft. It's all done by computer. It's all very, very controlled, so you can get the exact pressure you want. Because if you push too hard, you're going to get like bitter and different flavors, which most people don't want in their wines. When you use a basket press, which is, you know, technology from the 1800s, there's way less control. It's much rougher on the grapes, but they're trying to make you know, honest, authentic wines without using technology. And I think they've done a really good job, because I don't find this wine to be flawed in any way. It's delicious. But yeah, it has a little bit of that kind of oxidative, nutty note, which is just adds a little bit of complexity.
Yeah, my first reaction when you said like they do everything by hand and horseplow and that type of thing, automatically I'm like, how do they make any money? You know, like that's a tough one.
Yeah, great question. Like I said, I'm not totally familiar with the ins and the outs. And I don't think they're a particularly big winery, even though they have 80 acres on their property. But yeah, they make excellent wines. And if you get a chance to see that, well, here's the label again, and their Pinot labels are going to look very much the same. So if you ever want to give these wines a try, there was very little of this particular bottling brought in. There was only 6 cases, and we used 4 of them for our wine club. So it's going to be difficult. We've got a couple of bottles left, not too many at Oddfish. So if anybody wants to try another bottle, come on in. We've got a few left.
Awesome. Wow, that was quite a unique wine. You know, I think if anyone's in the restaurant and they say, "Oh, Pinot Gris, hook me up," and they point at that, you definitely want to have a conversation with them. Say, you know, it might not be exactly what you have in mind when you have that Pinot Gris in mind.
Yeah, because it's not, you know, we have a Pinot Gris from British Columbia, which is made, you know, totally with technology. I'm not saying that one's better than the other, but the results are different. it's very clean, very precise. It's, very fruit driven. You don't have like any of that nutty or kind of earthy thing that's going on.
Yeah.
But this was quite popular. I tasted this with all the staff at Oddfish last night, and they all loved it. Like, we're going to feature this wine tonight at Oddfish, and they were really excited to do that, even though we already have a Pinot Gris by the glass. It's so different from what we're already offering. They were excited to have something different. So I think it's going to be quite popular.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, so popular. 2 cases go by fast once the staff starts talking about it.
Exactly. So let's get on to wine number 2, which is from a winery called Koerner in the Clare Valley in Australia. And this is Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc. There's a little bit of Malbec, some Grenache, very unique blend. And when you hear Cabernet Sauvignon planted anywhere in the New World, Napa Valley, Australia, the Okanagan, they usually say that they're paying homage to Bordeaux. But this winery is very open about the fact they're paying homage to the Loire Valley, which is further north than Bordeaux. The wines are always lighter, so that's what they're doing. This wine, I can't really tell from the video, but it's a little paler. It is only 12.8% alcohol, so it's definitely on the light side. It's incredibly aromatic. This wine has been aged in oak, but it's been aged in Foudre, which is a large, old, I think it's 5,000 liters as opposed to 225 liters. So really neutral old oak. So you're not really going for oak flavor, just a gentle oxidative process. You don't see a lot of Foudres in the New World. You see them all over the place in the Old World, especially in Italy, Portugal, Spain, but you don't really see them too much in the New World. So it's a couple of brothers that started this winery, and it's not that old. They started in, say it was, I can't recall, but they're a fairly new winery. I would say 2014, so less than 10 years old. They have their own vineyard that they inherited from their parents called Gully View, and then they source from 2 like literally neighboring vineyards. All of their vineyards are within 750 meters of one another, so you can walk to all the vineyards that they source from. Again, they make wines. So
Todd, that makes all these vineyards quite small that they're pulling from.
Yeah, they're not. This is not a huge production by any means. Yeah, very boutique. Again, very hands-on. They pick a lot earlier than their neighbors because they like wines with more freshness as opposed to ripeness and power. So their wines they drink much earlier than, say, a cab that's emphasizing power and structure that might need a few years in the bottle to come around. These wines are picked earlier with the intent on drinking fresher wines younger. I think I really like this winery. I think it's cool. When I don't drink a lot of Cabernet because I don't, usually when I'm personally drinking, I'm drinking to go with the food that I eat. We don't eat a ton of beef or red meat in this house. So I generally don't drink big reds that often, but when I do drink Cabernet, this is usually the producer I reach to because it is lighter, because it can go with roast chicken or even like this. I think this would be really good with salmon, right? Something that's not too heavy. So on the nose, this wine really jumps out of the glass. I'm getting tons of like ripe plum and raspberry, lots of raspberry, like almost like raspberry jam. It's like it's not underripe, even though it's been picked early. Lots of spice. You're getting a lot of that, kind of green bell pepper and that really nice vegetal herby note that you get off Cabernet and Cabernet Franc. A little bit of an earthy note. I'm also picking up a little bit of cola as well. So again, this wine is not underripe, even though it's been picked early.
This wine has a lot of personality.
Mm-hmm. Really light alcohol, super fresh. It's actually quite tannic. This has been open, like I said, overnight in my wine fridge, and the tannin has really come out. It's showing a lot stronger than it did yesterday, but not in a bad way. I definitely want this. I think this wine's beautiful on its own, but because of that tannin, it makes me hungry. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to try that pork ragu or that mushroom ragu that's coming in with the wine box. Yeah, so a lot of the same fruit flavors. It smells really ripe and almost jammy on the nose, but on the palate, the fruit is a little bit tartar. It's quite fresh. And instead of being ripe and maybe jammy, it's quite tart, and it kind of tastes like maybe a little bit, fresh and underripe berry fruit on the palate. Yeah, a little bit darker on the palate as well. Really yummy, really delicious. Like you said, a wine with a lot of personality.
It most certainly does. Hey, this leads me to a question. For this wine, you don't want to cellar this too much because you said the style that it's made, like it's ready to go.
Yeah, well, we've had this conversation a few times about when you drink wines, and it really comes down to how do you like your wines to show? So if you wanted to age this wine for a few years, you could. If you wanted like the fruity character to kind of tame down a little bit, and then have notes like dried fruit instead of ripe fruit. And if you wanted, some secondary character to come in, like, maybe some tobacco or some leather, things like that, you could certainly age this for a few years. It's not going to go bad. Me personally, I like this wine exactly where it is. I like the fresh fruit character and like how fruity and exuberant it is. And so I think it's perfect now and over the next couple of years. Another thing I will say is that this wine has a slight chill on it right now because I've just pulled it out of my wine fridge. And when I was tasting this last week with some of the staff at Oddfish, Melanie said, I think this wine would be really good with a light chill on it. And she's right, because it is lighter. I think with just a slight chill, you don't want it cold, but just gently cool to the touch. So if you were going to open this wine, maybe put it in the fridge for 15 or 20 minutes and then take it out and drink it with just that slight chill on it. And I think it just shows a little bit better. The personality expresses itself better with the light chill.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I actually just picked up these wines about 45 minutes ago, and I plopped them in the fridge for about 20 minutes, and it definitely has a chill. Like, it's for me, it's a perfect type of sipping. It's it's type of, especially if I was having a summertime, I definitely want to chill on this for sure.
Exactly. I think this is great. As you know, I buy the box every month, and I'm gonna hang on to this. I'm not going to drink this wine right away. I'm going to wait until it's patio weather, and then when we're having a barbecue, I'll pull this out with the light chill, and it can be our starter red, because we never just have one on our patio.
Hey, and I don't want to beat this to death, but it's about aging wines and pulling them at the right time. And pardon me if you've answered this before. Maybe it's just in our private conversation. I'm not sure if it was in this forum, but I was with friends this past weekend, and we opened a bottle of wine that my friend has three children, and he bought, I think, 6 wines in the birth year of all of these children. So, and the whole idea was to have, I think, one when they were 19, one when they get married, that type of a thing. So his children are 20 to like 22 to 19 now. So, and a lot of these reds, and we pulled one, and it just felt a little zingy. And he's like, I don't know, like, I mean, is it going to be awful by the time I give it to her when she gets married, type of a deal? And so my question to you is, you obviously don't know the wine I'm talking about, neither do I, but when you have intention of cellaring, is it almost you have to be in touch with the vintner? Do you have to have someone like you who knows wines back and forth to actually know how long? What is that window for? Okay, needs 5 years, 5 to 10 years is great, but if you hit 15, you just kind of lost some money there. You lost what it can be.
I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I guess like some general rules of thumb that I use for when I'm buying for my own cellar and how I'm going to age. Keep in mind that there are very few wines that will age for 20 years, right? Most of the wine that's produced today is meant to be consumed upon release and within a year or two. I mean, I can't remember what the number is. It's staggering. In British Columbia, like the amount of wine that gets consumed within the first 48 hours of being purchased is like, it's like 90% or something like that. It's a huge number. Most people drink their wines right away. So winemakers are hip to that, and they're making wines that are approachable upon release, right?
But even like the old But even like the old school and old world people who, Brunello has like, they wouldn't alter their wines for the market. Is there
Well,
certain wines?
some producers have. Some producers have. I mean, I was just in Montalcino last year, and you've got two schools. You've got the old guard and the new guard. The old school way of doing wine is big barrels, long macerations and fermentations, and then long aging in the barrel. And when you do that, you get wines that are very tannic and they need a lot of time to soften. And then you've got the kind of new guard, which will do smaller barrels, shorter time in barrel, shorter macerations. So when the wines are released, the tannins have been managed differently, so they present differently, and so they drink a little easier upon release. Now, there's no right or wrong way, but the old way of making wine, I think, just has a longevity to it that the new way doesn't.
Mhm.
So I've tasted wines from the 04 vintage from Tuscany within the last week. And so that makes them 18 years old. If they were my wines, I'd be drinking them up. I wouldn't be hanging on to them too much longer.
Right.
And even
Yeah.
even with the old guard, unless they're the top bottlings from best vintages, those wines generally at 10 years old, they're singing. By 15 years old, they're in their prime. 20, they might be.
Yeah, I
so
find it interesting because I was at when we turned 40, we all went to the Bahamas as a group, and a lot of my friends from school, and we had dinner at Grey Cliff. And Grey Cliff is known as a great cigar making place, and it's where gangsters used to own it back in the day. Like, it has such a crazy history and it's such a beautiful space. And our viewers at home, but a lot of people have been to Bahamas and they know about Grey Cliff because it's also a wonderful restaurant. And we had a big night there, and they gave us a tour of the wine a cellar, which is kind of crazy. And they had so many old bottles of wine, and I think the most prestigious bottle of wine they had, is for God knows how much money. But I stupidly said, "So what does it taste like?" And he says, "Well, we don't know until you buy it." But it was like, a 50-year-old white, and I'm like, what a disappointment that would be if it just, would be, crazy expensive, but pretty pedestrian because it's just too old.
Yeah. And I've seen it happen more than once. Wine that's been held on to just a little too long. So
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly wines that will go that distance, but yeah, they're few and far between. They're also very expensive.
Exactly. And pretty sure for the people that are in our wine club, they're getting consumed Friday night.
Yeah.
Because we have so many people do dinner parties.
So let's move on to wine number 3, which is from Luís Seabra, which is from the Douro region in Portugal. Another young winery. Luis was the winemaker at a winery in the Douro called Nieuwpoort, which is a family-run winery. The current head of that winery is Dirk Nieuwpoort. Really fascinating guy. And Luis made his wine for 10 years. And the Nieuwpoort family makes port wine from the Douro, but they're probably more well known for the revolution of dry table wines that started about 20 or 30 years ago in the Douro. So I think they make a lot more dry table wine now. And Luis was his winemaker for 10 years. And so in 2013, he went out on his own and started his own winery. So as far as I know, he doesn't own any of his own vineyards, but he buys fruit from the different growers in the valley and makes terroir-driven wines from high elevation vineyards in the Douro Valley. So he makes a really interesting wine. Now, we've had this wine on the list at Oddfish for a while, and it's a wine that people don't usually order because they don't know it, but it's a personal favorite of mine. If I want a rich red that still has tons of freshness. So the last wine we had was 12.8% alcohol. This one's only 12% alcohol, but it is opaque. It is like deeply colored. It's got tons of fruit. But because of the high elevation vineyards, you get the Douro Valley in the summer is like 45 degrees Celsius. It is hot. It is hot. But elevation, the higher you go, the cooler things get. So he picks from high elevation vineyards, old vines. The vines that go into this particular bottling are between 40 and 60 years old. And the high elevation, also you get those hotter days, but you also get cooler nights. So it slows the ripening down at night. And so it preserves the freshness in the grapes. So you've got a wine that's perfectly ripe, but 12% alcohol and still has a ton of freshness.
Todd, quick question before you get into the the actual tasting of this. I don't know how many of our fans have been to Portugal, and with the intention of doing some tastings. But if you go, here it's easy when you go Napa Valley, Oregon, Naramata, stopping in. There's so many places to stop in for tasting. Are they set up like we are here? Here it's definitely like they see it coming. They're loaded for bear, or is it almost like you have to, know the secret code to come in there and get a tasting? I'm not sure what the deal is.
I mean, some areas are different than others. Recently visited Portugal. We didn't make it to the Douro on that trip, but we went to Muxão, and they don't have a tasting room. And they're way out in the middle of nowhere. And if you stop by, I mean, yeah, they're super hospitable, they're super friendly. So they do something for you, but they've got nowhere, they don't have like a proper tasting room. You probably get a tour, you get to taste some wines out of the barrel, that kind of thing. But they don't have like a proper tasting room. In the Douro, I think it might be a little bit different because of the proximity to Porto, the city there, and all the big port houses that have been around for 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
Having never been there myself, I'm not sure what the setup is. I know that there's a lot of tasting rooms, especially for the port houses in Porto. But for a winery like this, Louis Seabra, I don't know if he has a tasting room or not. I'd have to look into that. But my guess is that because it is so expensive to farm in the Douro, he probably doesn't have a big winery with a big elaborate setup. I'm sure you could arrange a visit, but would it be like if you went to the Okanagan or Napa or the Willamette Valley? Probably not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That would
Sorry, I interrupted the whole tasting here. Jeez Louise, people are like, just
oh,
get
no,
on
it's
with
okay.
it.
No, this one, I love the wines that Louis Seabra does. This is a red wine that's been totally foot stomped, so no press in this. It's all stomped by foot. They call them lagars. They're essentially they're long rectangular cement bats that come up to about your knee, and then people get in there 5 or 6 times a day and they step down on the grapes. And the reason they do that still is because it is the most gentle way to extract the juice from the grapes. They've got pneumatic presses with all the technology, but they can still be less gentle than a human foot stamping gently on grapes. And when we were in Portugal last year, we actually got the opportunity to do that for the first time. So if you ever find yourself there doing harvest, go do it. It's super fun. Like it was one of the funnest winery visits I've ever had in my life. So if you ever get a chance to go stomp on some grapes, do it. It's super fun. So with that in mind,
for the pros that are there, the people who do this yearly are like, that's their job per se. I'm not sure how it really works. Is it a job, or is it just friends come around, or like old school, old world? But what do you think? Can you stomp for 30 minutes and then you got to take a break? Like, how tired did you get?
So where I was, I'm not sure how they do it everywhere, but where I was is they do it 6 times a day, every kind of 3 or 4 hours for 20 minutes.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work because it's fun, but you're stepping through like big piles of grape juice with grapes and stems and all this other stuff. And there's metal piping running through that's keeping the must cold, right? There's like a cooling system. So you have to watch out for that.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't want to fall in.
Well, I was just going to ask you, like, were you like, sometimes you're like, oh my God, like I got to focus here. I got to engage the core a little bit.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was very deliberate with my steps. I didn't want to fall in, because it's grape juice. I mean, it's red grape juice. It's going to stain, right? My legs were stained for weeks after it was a little. So it's definitely a workout. I did it for 20 minutes, and I don't think I'd want to do it for any more than that, because like the must is actually quite cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, still super fun though. I highly recommend it.
And is there a drop of Todd sweat in that vintage?
No, I don't think, because it was so cool, because it was so cool. But even if there was, by the time fermentation and they filter it, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
They've been doing it for hundreds of years. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay. So this wine is made up of the blend actually changes on this wine every year, and it's made with traditional port grapes. I get a lot of dark fruits. This is a 2018 vintage, and the fruit character is fresh, but I am picking up just a hint of development as well. Like, I'm getting dark berries, dark plum. This is definitely more dark fruit than fruit.
Hey Todd.
Seabra, Xisto Ilimitado, made with traditional port grapes, lots of dark berry fruit, lots of plum. The fruit character is ripe and fresh. I'm picking up just a hint of development as well. The fruit is just starting to become dry a little bit. You get lots of soil and turned earth. This is quite an earthy wine. Picking up just a hint of leather as well, and then there's some dark spices. Touch of brown sugar, molasses. Dark flowers. I get like purple flowers, and again, they're not quite fresh. They're starting to dry out a little bit, maybe just becoming a little bit more like potpourri. Lead pencil. This wine is grown on all schist soils, and the way that that's presenting to me in the glass is that it kind of smells like lead pencil a little bit.
What did you say? They're all what soils? And I don't even mean to be a smart aleck. Shift, did you say?
Schist. It's
Okay.
a type of soil that we see all over the world, and produces wines with a slightly mineral component, and to be sometimes presents like lead pencil. Really dark, crunchy fruit. It's ripe but tart at the same time. Really good tannic structure, lots of freshness. Just lip smackingly good. It just makes me want to go back and have another sip. Again, another wine I think that's going to do really well with that, either the mushroom or Calabrian ragu.
Yeah. Once again, that's definitely another bright wine too. It's not something that you have to struggle to find the characteristics. It's definitely evident.
Yeah, the red wines of Portugal are really valuable to me as somebody who talks about wine for a living, because if somebody, quite often I'll get people that say, well, you know what, I really like the wines from California or Australia or South America, so ripe, bold, fruit driven wines, but I really like to try some wines from the old world. I like to try something from Europe. And usually my first bridge wine will be something from Portugal, because you get like this exuberant fruit that you get from the New World, but then you get some of this old world charm, like kind of like the the freshness and the minerality, and maybe a little bit of the earthiness and the like the leathery character I'm picking up on. So for me, it's the perfect place to take somebody that wants to try something from the old world, but it's not going to be totally unfamiliar to them. If you take somebody from Nab to Barolo in one step, they might not like it. But this has always been something good to have in the back pocket. And also, I think I've mentioned this many times, the wines of Portugal are extremely undervalued. You can get the same wine, the same quality level from somewhere else in Europe, like Spain, Italy, France, wherever. From the New World, the wine's going to be more expensive. Portugal's getting much better at marketing their wines. But I think still ways to go with some consumers. I love the wines and drink them all the time, because I find that such good price to quality ratio.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I have a question in terms of, if you were living there and like you vacationing there, and you, a lot of people stop by and it's almost filling a growler or whatever, like, you know, a bigger format type of thing. Do they get this wine, or is it a little more pedestrian wine that the you know, if you're a neighbor or like someone down the road who always fills up their wine, whatever they're carrying it in, do they get the real thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they might not be getting this, but they'll be getting something delicious.
Yeah.
So on our trip to Portugal, when we were at the winery doing the foot stomping, that winery is called Muxão, and they have it's a 5 liter growler that you can fill up. And the first time you buy it, it's 10 euros. And when you bring it back to fill it up again, it's 5 euros. And you're just getting young vines, young juice. It's not been aged in oak, or if it has, it's like the large old wood. But I think mostly the red wine that they were offering was done in stainless steel. And it was just from the young vines parcels that they don't think that the quality is good enough to go into their top cuvées yet. So they pick it a little earlier, they ferment it in stainless steel to keep it fresh. And yeah, you're not going to get the same character as you would with a wine like this, but it doesn't make it any less delicious, just makes it different. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, and at, like, you know, 5 euros for 5 liters of wine from one of the best producers in Portugal, to me that sounds like one heck of a deal, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
There's nowhere around here we can do that, not that I know of anyways.
Yeah, that's the wine we should be importing.
Mm-hmm. We'll get on the phone. So wine number 4, Foppiano from the Russian River Valley in California, in Sonoma. This is a grape called Petite Syrah, which is known as Durif in France. It has nothing to do with Syrah or Shiraz, even though the name might suggest otherwise. This is a wine that I've worked with for a really long time, and it's all about the story on this wine. So a couple of years ago, well, a lot of years ago, I read a book called When the Rivers Ran Red, and it was about prohibition in California. And the opening chapter in that book was about a winery on the opening day of prohibition, and the FBI has shown up with axes and taken axes to all of their vats, and all the wine ran out of the winery. And for a time in the winery, there was like wine up to your knees, right? And they just taken all their old wooden vats and destroyed them. So the neighbors came by with their, you know, their glasses or plastic jugs, got whatever wine they could, and they took it home. So the Foppianos were Italian immigrants. I can't remember where in Italy they came from, but they emigrated to the United States. And I think it was the late 1880s, got some property in Sonoma, planted a farm, started their life. And then, you know, a couple of decades later, prohibition comes around. Well, they're Italian, right? Wine's a way of life. We're not going to stop making wine. So after the FBI does this to their vats, they go out and they build a barn in the middle of, like, so if anybody's ever been to Sonoma, you know, it's like, it's not a heavily populated area, or at least in most areas. Back then it would have been like the middle of nowhere, right? Mm-hmm. Even though it's only a couple hours from San Francisco, it really was like the rugged country. So they built a farm in the middle of the forest, and they start making wine again. And them and their neighbors, the Segazios, would bootleg their wine to San Francisco in the middle of the night so that they wouldn't get caught. And there's actually police reports of the Foppianos and the Segazios getting into like gunfights with the FBI as they were bootlegging their wine to San Francisco. So for that reason, I've bought this wine for the last 15 years or so, because they are pretty badass. So
they were willing to fight the good fight, so you got to support them.
They fought the power. So this is a wine that I also keep in my back pocket, because most people have never heard of Petite Syrah. And if somebody wants a big red from California, but they don't want to pay like the trophy wine prices, this is always a really good wine to have, because this wine is quite rich. It's a departure from the last 2 red wines that we had. Super ripe, you know, 15% alcohol, unabashedly, you know, with a ton of personality like the last 2 wines, but there's just a little bit more of everything. The fruit is ripe and jammy, tons of dark fruit and blue fruit. I didn't really talk about the body on the last 2 wines, but they were kind of lean and kind of linear, whereas this one is quite rich and round and mouth filling. Also, in addition to that, that sweet and ripe and jammy dark and blue fruits, there's a pretty generous dose of new oak on here as well. Lots of vanilla, lots of sweet baking spices, lots of clove, cola.
This is much more of a mouthful than the previous two, that's for sure. Wow.
You get a little bit of that alcoholic pop that you didn't get on the first two reds, but the wine's still perfectly in balance. This is just a big, rich, muscular red built for, for a lot of richer type fares. Really good complexity. Finish pushes through like good medium plus. So there you have it, Foppiano Petite Syrah gangster wine.
Now, just take a step back. Not much Petite Syrah is grown in California at all.
I don't know what the exact numbers are. There's actually more than you'd think because it was brought over, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there's actually a lot of old vine Petite Syrah planted. The old bush vines, there's 100-year-old vineyards. The other thing too is when they planted vineyards back then, they didn't have, professionally trained people planting the vineyards in perfect alignment and rows with training systems. They planted it in the ground, it came up, it wasn't trained, it was just like an old bush vine, which what that means is it's a plant that's not grown on a trellising system. You go to the Okanagan, Napa Valley, where like even the old world now, they'll have the plants grow up and then there's a wire or two wires that they grow the fruit along, right? It's trained, it's all going to be efficient so you can farm efficiently. But back then they didn't have those techniques. So literally it was just a plant that grew out of the ground. And then you'd have bunches of grapes growing off of it about, knee to thigh level. And so the old vine vineyards that haven't been pulled up, that's how they're still planted. And they're interplanted with several different grape varieties. So you've got Zinfandel, Petite Syrah, Carignan, what have you, all grown together. So a lot of times you're doing what are called field blends, which is they're just harvesting the entire vineyard at the same time, and you get what you get. Some of them, they might not even know what all the grapes are because they haven't had the money to test them. So there is some Petite Syrah. It's got a long history, but you don't see it bottled on its own too often. More likely you'll see like 5%, 7% of a blend, and that's because it's part of an old vineyard that has been there for a really long time.
Right on. Wow. So there we have it. And you already mentioned the middle two reds were pretty good for the mush or for the pulled pork ragu, you would say, that we're having this month.
Yeah. I think both are really good. I actually had a chance to try the pulled pork ragu yesterday, and it was delicious. It's got just a touch of heat, as some of our dishes do. Not spicy by any means, but just like a little hum of heat in the back. And so, I mean, all of these wines, wines 2, 3, and 4, wines 2 and 3 were quite linear and fresh, but they weren't lacking in fruit. I think the fruit ripeness on all these wines make them great candidates for that dish. I didn't get a chance to try the mushroom yet. I'm going to try it tomorrow. Yeah.
Right on. Because and you say that, so, and I think the middle two wines are pretty darn good for the mushroom ragu as well, right?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how Jamie made it, but the one thing I like about Jamie's cooking is that it's always balanced, and there'll be a touch of acidity in anything that he does. So I think the acid, particularly on wines 2 and 3, are going to work really well with that. Yeah, because we know in our wine club we have 25% of our people are vegetarian, so there's a pretty big demand for a vegetarian fare, which obviously I enjoy. So because it's right up my alley. So. And then you just
contributed a bunch of music to the playlists that I get to go through now. I was walking the dog, and all these songs came through. So, gosh, what themes have we had? We had cover tunes, we had randomness, and then happy songs for things that made me kind of happy for January. February, the theme was Black History Month. So there's going to be a lot of soul and funk and that type of fare. And so that's the thoughts that I was going through my head when I was making the list. And then you contributed a ton. And this is the music that I gravitate towards anyway. So it was an absolute joy to put this together. And yeah, so once again, I had my fun putting the music list together, and then you just threw in a bunch. So I think it's going to be about a 3-hour playlist. So buckle up.
That's what I love about the playlist, though, is that when we started, we said, oh, it's going to be like 90 minutes. And then it was 2 hours and 2.5 hours. Now it's growing to 3 hours. But I think it's great because I know I'm always looking for new music. And I've had lots of feedback from our subscribers that they love the playlist. It's a big component of what we do, in that they're constantly looking for new music. So I've had 2 people in particular say, hey, like, that's a really cool concept, and I look forward to the playlist as much as I look forward to the wines, because I get new music that I wouldn't have discovered on my own.
Yeah.
And on that too, if anybody has feedback, good or bad, on the wines, please reach out to us via social media, or if you see us in the restaurants, let us know, because I try to talk to as many of you as I can when I'm in the restaurants, but I haven't talked to all of you. So if you've got ideas, or there's something you really liked, or there's something that you really didn't like, please let me know, because this is for you guys at the end of the day, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, what you're digging and what you're not. So please reach out.
And that's a message from Todd, not me. So seek out Todd with all your feedback.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's call it a wrap. That's number 4 is in the can, and yeah, we're going to get these. Well, when you see this video, it'll be you'll be opening up the wines, I'm sure. Yeah, enjoy it, and enjoy your dinner party for all those that have dinner parties with these 4 wines and knock them all back in one night. And yeah, so once again, a pleasure. Thanks, Todd, for your time and sharing your knowledge and putting up with me. And yeah, so that's a wrap for this February 2022. See you later.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, guys.